Welcome to the Screen the Screener College Basketball Podcast with your hosts, Mike Randle and Gus Kearns.
Welcome back to the Screen the Screener College Basketball Podcast, where we continue our train as we get closer each and every day to the start of the 2021-2022 college basketball season. I'm your host, Mike Randle. You can follow me on Twitter at RandleRant. And today we have Brian Fonseca, who's a sports reporter for NJ.com. He is a Rutgers guy. He can preview the Scarlet Knights, which are near and dear to our heart here at Screen the Screener because we are a New Jersey-based podcast. Follow Brian on Twitter at BrianNNNF. He's going to give us a few minutes to preview the upcoming season after a great one for Rutgers last year for Steve Pikiell and the Scarlet Knights. Brian, thanks so much for joining us today. How you doing?
I'm doing well. I appreciate you having me on, and I appreciate you spelling out my Twitter name because it's always a tongue twister for me, so I appreciate you getting that out of the way for me.
No problem, man. You do great work here in Jersey, and we are a New Jersey podcast through and through. And it was really frustrating 2 years ago with the ending to COVID. Rutgers had a fantastic season, ended the season with a 71-68 overtime win at Purdue for 2020. We really thought that team was going to the tournament, was going to make some noise. COVID ends it, but they come back this past year. They play well, they make it back to the tournament, and they even win a game. So talk about the season as a whole coming into last year, how COVID may have affected it, and of course the great job by Steve Pikiell and the crew to get to the NCAA tournament, win a game, and almost pull the big upset over Houston.
You touched on it a lot. A big obstacle the whole year was overcoming that the loss of that high because they had come in the year before, and it looked like they were going to snap a 29-year NCAA tournament drought. They got over that hump in a year that I don't think many people expected it at the start of the year, and in spectacular fashion in that huge win in overtime at Mackey Arena against Purdue, which is a massive mountain in and of itself. And to go from that high to just crash down to COVID and have to really do it all over again because while they probably would have made the tournament, there was no tournament to make, so that streak lived on. And they had the weight of those expectations on them all over again. And they had to do it in a strange year with no fans in the stands, which was one of the big reasons they played so well in that season was the massive amount of fan support in the RAC made it a really tough place to play. So they had to overcome all those obstacles. They had to, they couldn't live normal life. They were really only spending time with each other, which is a unique challenge in and of itself. And they managed to do it again, which was a pretty big feat. They did it at last second once again. The season had points where it could have gone off the rails. It really, especially in January, they had a stretch where they lost a few games, and it could have gone either way. But they pulled it together, and they won again in overtime in Minnesota in a game where Jacob Young makes a not program-defining play, but a play that people that follow this program will remember for a long time. Minnesota had a move in transition where if they get this bucket, they win the game. And Jacob Young comes out like a free safety at center court and gets a steal to keep Rutgers in the game. And if he doesn't do that, the season is probably over. So it was a season that many people will remember for many reasons. COVID, it's the one COVID year that will hopefully ever happen in program history. And they snapped a 30-year streak, which will live on in the minds of the fans forever. So very strange, unique year. And I guess we'll see how they build on that coming into this fall.
Yeah, it's amazing that streak that you're talking about in the middle of the season. 5 straight losses, Iowa, Michigan State, Ohio State, Wisconsin, and Penn State. Always believed in this team. Always believed in what Steve Pikiell does with defense. And they just needed to get over the hump. And what was interesting is that last game against Houston, I was all over it. We talked about it when we previewed the tournament. That was a game that was ripe for the taking. The free throws, of course, hurt them there. They played really, really well against a tough Houston team. It's all about matchups, Brian, but in that game, they gave Houston everything they could handle. And I believe if they won that game, they were a great dark horse pick to make the Final Four. I just think back like 10 years ago saying that Rutgers would be that, but it really was. In a lot of ways, this team had the lunch pail, the defense mentality, and gave Houston all it can handle in that game.
Yeah, and your thought of them making the Final Four, had they won that game, is a very popular one. I think that's one of the big what-ifs that will follow this program for the rest of the time. I thought they should have won that game the way it went. They were one Miles Johnson dunk away from really sealing that game.
Yes.
They were a move that Geo Baker makes a million times during his career. He gets it wrong that one time. A lot of things went wrong for them at the end of that game, but it's part of building a program, right? Like these are the games that Rutgers has not been in decades, and these are things that you kind of learn from and build on, not only for the players but also for Steve Pikiell. This was probably the biggest game of his coaching career, so there are things that he'll learn from that. I'm not entirely convinced about what would happen had they beat Houston. You literally never know, right?
Yep.
We're going to play Syracuse, which is a team they beat during the regular season, and then they play Oregon, which would have been a great storyline with the Eugene Omoruyi rematch. Would they have won those two games? Who knows? But I definitely agree with you that Houston game was there for the taking, and that's something that I think fueled them all off season, and it's something that nobody on that team will ever forget because they were right there.
I remembered my wife is from Stony Brook, so I remember Steve Pikiell there. And what he is now approaching with Rutgers is really all you can ask for as a head coach, and that's sustained success. People get on Calipari's only won one title while he's at Kentucky for a decade, Self only one title. But what he has here with Rutgers is sustained success. And this season, they are bringing back a lot of players from last year's team looking to go even further.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. The sustained success in the first place was always elusive for Rutgers, right? And for him to be able to first get them to the tournament or have a tournament caliber season a couple years ago was already an achievement. To do it a second year in a row in a COVID year is a great sign for the future of the program in that they can build upon seasons. If they can do it again this year after losing three starter quality caliber guys to the transfer portal, and if they could build on that, that would show again continued sustained success from Steve Pikiell. I think it's possible. I think Steve has told in a number of interviews he's done this offseason that he believes this is the best team he has yet. It feels like he says that every year, so it's tough to determine how much validity that has. But I think there's some merit to it, and I think I'm very excited to see how this team will look this season, just because they lost a guy, Jacob Young, who, yes, was a very good player, had great moments for the program. That dunk against Purdue over Harms, the free safety move we mentioned against Minnesota. But he was also an extremely high usage guy. He had some of the most usage in the Big Ten. He always had the ball in his hands, and that kind of, I don't want to say compromise, that's not the right word, but it shaped the way Rutgers played. And it feels like without him, without another high usage guy like Montez Mathis, there will be more ball movement. There will be a different look to the Rutgers offense. Whether that's good or bad, that will be determined. But I am excited to see how they look with these new pieces in place.
Yeah, and some of those new pieces coming in, their core is solid. Mulcahy, Geo Baker, we call him Geo Baker, the shot maker here. Ron Harper, of course, is up from Don Bosco in North Jersey, had a fantastic career there as well. And I guess the key question coming in, Brian, is going to be Cliff Omoruyi having to replace Miles Johnson. Miles Johnson now out at UCLA, but the big man in the middle, this is a team, Rutgers, that last year ranked top 20 in defensive efficiency per Ken Pom. They were great at effective field goal percentage in the Big Ten. You have to be that way. Talk about these players that are coming back and how really inside the big man is I think the key to their success on both ends of the floor.
I definitely agree that the 5 spot is the most important and it has the most question marks as well. I think Cliff showed a lot of great signs in his freshman year last year, and I think if he could build on those and continue, especially on the defensive end, he could be, like Miles Johnson, one of the better centers in the Big Ten. Him and Miles were, I think, top 10 in block percentage in the Big Ten, and that'll be huge to kind of continue the defensive strength that you had mentioned under Pikiell. The question about the 5 is, one, yes, can Cliff build and live up to the potential that he has coming out of high school and all the great signs he's showed this offseason? But 2, behind him, can they find a suitable backup center to fill in the minutes when Cliff will inevitably, he's had a ton of foul trouble his freshman year. It seems like that is probably going to continue unless he makes a dramatic change. When he does have to go to the bench with 2 fouls in the first half, will Ralph Agee, who's a graduate transfer from San Jose State, be able to replicate his defense? Agee will add a lot of new dimensions on the offensive end. He has a very unique he can play face up at the 5, which is something that no 5 has had under Steve Pikiell, so that will be interesting. But he leaves a lot to be desired on the defensive end. So if he could hold on and kind of give them serviceable minutes when Cliff is on the bench, that will be a huge key in the success of the season. And I guess Dean Rieber, who is a returning freshman, he's technically a true freshman because of the COVID year. He's another 5 who can also make a big jump and influence there. They'll need either of those guys to step up and fill in that hole. As for the other spots, Paul Mulcahy will be very interesting in that he hasn't been able to really grab the point guard spot in his first 2 seasons and make it his own. I think he has a great opportunity to do so now and kind of be the leader of the offense with the ball in his hand. I don't think he will have the ball in his hands, in a situation where it's a tight game, last 4 minutes. I think that's Geo Baker time. I think that'll be Geo Baker time for the rest of his Rutgers career. That's just the way it is. But I think during the game, early on, in the rhythm of it, Paul Mulcahy will have the ball in his hands a lot more and be able to kind of be the floor general that a lot of people saw him being as a recruit and that he showed a lot of glimpses of during his career.
Now they have some freshmen coming in, as well as another transfer who I think is going to be pretty big for you. Andre Hire from LSU. He's from the Bronx, but was down with the Tigers for quite some time. Former 4-star recruit. He started 15 games for LSU last year. I think he fills a role here at the power forward position. So talk about him as well as the newcomers, because they really just need a couple pieces here. And like you said, they're looking to have a better year than they had last year. And having the continuity, having the solid defense, shot-making ability, I think Hyatt really steps in and fills a void, as well as maybe some of the freshmen can see the floor.
I think Hyatt, his impact is twofold. I think he adds a lot on the defensive end as far as his length. He's very long. He's a willing defender. And I think he is very excited to play in a more team-oriented system. LSU was essentially 5 guys playing one-on-one basketball under Will Wade, and that was not really Hyatt's game. He didn't really fit into that. He is more suited for a 5-man game that Rutgers has. But he even in that system at LSU, he did very impressed very much on the defensive end. And I think that's something that Steve Pikiell really liked out of him as a recruit when he recruited him hard out of the Bronx. He really wanted him as a high school recruit. So he's glad to have him back now as a transfer. And the other thing he adds is he is another body to play at the 4 that can move Ron Harper Jr. to the 3, which is the spot that I think he is a bit better at. And it adds more length to the floor on the defensive end and allows Ron Harper to have a little bit more offensive freedom. The rest of the newcomers, Jaden Jones, who was a freshman who enrolled last January but did not play. A lot of buzz coming out of Rutgers from him. Seems like he will have a sizable role. They're looking for him to be a scorer. He was a great scorer as a recruit at high school. I don't talk a lot about these guys as recruits. They kind of have to show it, as players. But there's a lot of good signs coming out of him. I think he can be one of the better offensive weapons if he can kind of put what he's putting on the practice floor into a game setting. So I think he has a chance of being a breakout player for them. And Jaylen Miller, who's another freshman, he came in this summer. A lot of good reports about his defense. Apparently he's a very tenacious defender, giving some of the regular guys some fits in practice. So he could be another, the next, Steve Pikiell, hard-nosed defender that kind of plays to his image on the floor.
The Big Ten moved their full regular season schedule back a little bit. So it starts early in December. So the non-conference schedule takes on even more importance here because it's sort of abbreviated. And then they end earlier, of course, giving them some time to get ready for the tournament. Talk about the non-conference schedule this year for Rutgers. Of course, it was very good last year. Only 4 games because of COVID. Sacred Heart, Fairleigh Dickinson, Hofstra, Syracuse went 4-0 before they got into, of course, the meat of one of the toughest conferences in the country, the Big Ten. So talk about their non-conference, what they have lined up as they get ready here to start the 2021 season.
Sure. The non-conference schedule is a classic Steve Pikiell schedule in that it has a lot of local, low-major teams. His philosophy is that the Big Ten, as you mentioned, is a monster in and of itself and is enough, one, to create a tournament resume and to challenge the team. So the non-conference schedule is a way to kind of let the newcomers, the freshmen, the transfers ease their way into the team, kind of allow the team to gel together, him to see what is going on with the team, what he can kind of experiment with. So that continue. There are very few challenges on the schedule outside of the obligatory, ACC Big Ten Challenge game against Clemson, the Gavitt game challenge contest against DePaul, and the usual Garden State Classic against Seton Hall. Outside of that, there are no really big non-conference teams, and that'll give an opportunity for guys like for the freshmen from last year, Dean Rieber, Oscar Palmquist, Cliff Omoruyi. Those guys get a chance to have another full non-conference slate to kind of ease in and develop their game, and allows guys like Jaden Jones and Jaylen Miller, who are freshmen who have never played in a college basketball game, to do the same, get their feet wet, adjust to the thing. So I expect Rutgers to come out record-wise positive. have a winning record coming out of the non-conference. But more importantly, the non-conference slate is really just to kind of gel the team and ease them into what will be another wild slate in the Big Ten.
Brian, this has been great. We appreciate a few minutes. Just one more question, then I'll get you out of here. So now the bar has been raised. So what would you, and from what you're hearing, most of the Rutgers fans be happy with this season? I would think there has to be a return to the NCAA tournament. Are they looking for a Sweet 16? What do you think is the expectation and the hope here for Rutgers, both within the Big Ten Conference and in the postseason?
I think for fans, now that they're in the NCAA tournament, and you mentioned a lot of the cores coming back, I think anything but the NCAA tournament would be a disappointment. I think they should, at minimum, be on the bubble, fighting for a spot in the NCAA tournament come March. I think those are the expectations that Steve Pikiell has built in this program, and I think that based on what they have coming back is something that they should have as their bare minimum expectations. A lot of people are seeing this team as like a mid Big Ten team, 8th, 9th spot. I think that's probably fair. I think they are outside of the top 6 in the Big Ten, which is pretty solid. And I think they will at minimum make the NIT. I really think if they miss the NIT, it'll be a very poor season. I think they will at minimum make the NIT and will be going for NCAA tournament spot. I think the expectation should be, as this season as it is moving forward, Rutgers should make the NCAA tournament. And from there on, you mentioned before, it's all about matchups. It's really a crapshoot at the end of the day. Making the tournament is the big thing. And then from there, go as far as you can. But after all that, it's gravy. I don't think Rutgers is at a spot yet where they should be demanding Final Fours or Sweet 16s or anything like that.
There's a certain sort of swagger that comes with being a New Jersey basketball team, folks. You may have seen it in the Giants-Saint game yesterday when Jabril Peppers got the flip in overtime and then made a comment on the microphone about what was going to happen, but they normally deliver. And Rutgers delivered last year. They have a unique style, much like Houston, that can make a run. They are suited for Big Ten play. They are not afraid to go to Mackey Arena. They're not afraid to battle Michigan. And Steve Pikiell is the maestro and has done an amazing job. Folks, Brian Fonseca comes to us here, gave us a great preview into Rutgers at NJ.com. Of course, follow him on Twitter at Brian3NsF. Brian, thank you so much for a few minutes, man. We will definitely catch up with you during the season because Rutgers is good. They are solid. We've been longing for this for many years, and that's the point we're at, and we're hoping for a Sweet 16 this year for the Scarlet Knights.
Thanks for having me on, Mike. I really appreciate it.
I'm addicted to the appetite. It's a seat